Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Max Steyer. I am the president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on better government and stronger democracy. We believe that good government begins with good people, and it's why we're here to celebrate the extraordinary achievements of our career federal civil service. I want to thank all of you for being here. This is an important moment in time for recognizing public servants. It's Public Service Recognition Week, 1 week during the year in which we get to say thank you on a consistent basis for not only the 2 million civil servants in the federal workforce, but the 16 million employees, state, local government, teachers, police, everybody who are serving the public. And this has been a crazy year, not just for our country, but certainly for all public servants who have maintained an incredible level of help and service to the American public, despite having themselves also to deal with all the challenges of the pandemic. We've also got many challenges as a nation, whether it's the pandemic itself, a once in a 100-year health crisis, or the economic issues that have come from it, the racial equity issues, which are so profound, and clearly the very dangerous and challenging world that we're operating within as a society. I mentioned earlier that the partnership is about better government and stronger democracy. That connection is really important. As Frank Fukuyama has said, a Stanford professor, you need three things for an effective democracy. You need rule of law, you need to have accountability, which we get from elections, and you need an effective government. And that is only more true in the difficult and ever-changing world that we live in. So I'm very excited about the conversation that we are going to be having here. I also want to highlight the fact that we have public servants who are doing extraordinary things all the time that are usually unrecognized. And again, this is the moment to be recognizing them. We have our Samuel J. Heyman Service to America Medals program, where we identify extraordinary civil servants across the federal government. People who are like Mary Frances Matthews, who is at the Veterans Administration, who has succeeded in driving down the backlog of veterans benefits by 87%, or Ian Brownlee at the State Department, who helped organize a cross-agency effort to bring 100,000 Americans back to the United States at the beginning of the pandemic, or Stephen Jerzik, who is at NASA doing extraordinary things. So those and more, you can find those on our website. Amazing people who deserve recognition. If we want our government to work well, we need to make sure that we are recognizing those who are doing the extraordinary things that we're all benefiting from. So I am excited right now, though, to share a message from the leader of our government. Enjoy.
This week is Public Service Recognition Week. And in this year of peril and promise, there's a lot to recognize. Scientists, doctors, nurses, other health officials who are keeping us safe and healthy during this pandemic, developing and administering vaccinations, professionals at Small Business Administration who are making sure the small businesses get loans, stay afloat, and the officials at the Treasury Department who are making sure that families receive rescue plan checks that are such an important lifeline for so many people. The dedicated individuals at the VA who are taking care of those who served us in uniform. The teams at NOAA and FEMA who help predict and respond to severe weather. Everyone at NASA who have inspired us by landing a rover and flying a helicopter on Mars and showing that anything is possible in America. The list goes on. Every day, hundreds of thousands of public servants and their families are reminding us that our government isn't some foreign force in the distant capital. It's all of us. It's we, the people. And our nation's public servants are not only making sure our government works, they're making sure it works for all of us, for you, your families, and the communities you live in. I want to thank the Partnership for Public Service for honoring and recognizing our fellow Americans for their service to our country. And I'm honored to congratulate all the finalists for the 2021 Samuel J. Heyman Service to America Medals, the Sammys. Now, this is the 20th anniversary of the Sammys. These awards aren't just the Oscars of public service. They're a reminder that public service is noble, impactful, an impactful profession. And I hope that they'll encourage more young people to consider careers in public service. When you hear the stories and achievements of these honorees, you'll know why we should be so proud of this country. We're made of fellow Americans who do extraordinary things. So thank you for all you do, and many of you will continue to do. Congratulations to the Sammy winners.
So it is now my pleasure to turn the program over to our fantastic panelists who are a collection of amazing public servants. We have Dr. Fiona Hill, Ambassador Bill Taylor, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, and Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. And they are going to have a conversation led by James Holman, a columnist at the Washington Post, who previously wrote the Daily 202, something that I read every day and learn from every day. He is a bright spirit in Washington and will do a wonderful job leading this conversation. So over to you, and thanks all of you for, again, your great public service and having this conversation with all of us.
Thank you so much, Max, and thank you to all four of our panelists. It's not just public servants that we have here with us, we have real patriots. People who have really heroically and courageously served our country. And I want to start and open it up to all four of you. You know, you obviously have each spent quite a lot of time in public service, but your most recent tenures in government didn't necessarily end great. You know, some of you were more grievously mistreated than others, but you're still here today to talk to everyone about why they should go into public service. For young people watching who saw tens of millions of people were glued to their TV sets watching the four of you talk about what you saw on the inside and what you experienced, what do you say to them for why they should go into government or public service despite all of that? And I guess we can start with Ambassador Yovanovitch.
Sorry, I was muted there. Well, first of all, thanks for hosting us today. I think that public service is just such a privilege. And I worked for the US government, for the State Department for about 33 years. And, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I continue to believe that when you are working for your fellow Americans, you are working for something bigger and better than yourself. And it brings meaning to your life. You do important things every day, and you can make a difference. I think that sense of mission is something that I hope that we can give to young people today as they think about what their future careers might be. I think of JFK asking, think not what your country will do for you, think what you can do for your country. I think of the moonshot. I think of all those volunteers after 9/11 to defend our country. There are many important tasks, whether it is curing the coronavirus, coming up with vaccines and so forth, whether it is serving in national security jobs, whether it is something else. And our country needs everybody that's out there.
Ambassador Taylor.
So again, thank you. It's an honor to be here with these colleagues, these brave colleagues. Ambassador Yovanovitch is exactly right. What we get to do as public servants is to serve the American people. The president just said, "We the people." This is an important concept for us to keep in mind, and I think it's an inspiring concept. I mean, the president said that this makes the country better. This makes us all better. It's a public service. It's a public good, and I know that. That's the nature of Max's organization here, public good. So it is it's important for us to demonstrate that. It's important for us to reflect the values that make this country great and make this country work well for its people.
Fiona, do you want to? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, and I was just about to say something actually related to the mute, and then I've just done it. I was going to say thank you so much for this. And I was also going to say that we really need younger people, particularly people who know how to use a mute button, to think about national service. because James and Alex and Max aside, I can see that Masha and Bill and I have let our natural great come through. And one of the issues about public service, these days, it is started to be seen by people, and this is what Max's public partnership is trying to get over, as kind of the bastion of older people who have kind of, in the case of both Bill and Alex, been military veterans who kind of have come in after other kinds of service into public service to give something back, since that sense of mission. But in actual fact, when President Biden talks about the country coming back, everyone has a part to play. It's kind of Americans are coming back. We the people is not just we the people of a certain age or a certain background. It's we the people, and across all of the generations, across the entire geography of America, who are looking for a way to give back to our community, but also to build our communities. And public service comes in so many different forms, but it's a general spirit. And we really need all generations, people of all kinds of backgrounds to pull together to move the country forward. And so one of the things that, I hope that we'll be able to get out of this discussion, and as Max and his colleagues try to get more people interested in government service, is thinking of all the different forms and thinking for younger people out of school, out of community college, out of university, or all of the different things that they might think of themselves doing about how they could take part in this at the community level, the local government level, and at the federal government level. Because we need more young people to step up, to mentor people like us and show us how to use our computers, but also, kind of come up with fresh ideas about how we can move the country forward. And that's kind of one of the purposes of this week, of National Public Service Week, is to think about how everyone could play a role in this.
Colonel Vindman.
Thanks, James, for moderating, and Max, thank you and the Partnership for Public Service for hosting this conversation. Yesterday, I sat in on a conversation, a coffee table talk with the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. And one of the more interesting and difficult questions was, I don't know if I fully, from a student that's approaching the end of their academic life and entering, starting to consider work and potentially entering government. And she asked, what do you think about joining government if my views do not fully align with those in government? What kind of role can I fill? And it was a tough question. I had to think about it briefly, but I thought the key element is if you share a common set of values, and I think most public servants do share a common set of values, you want to give back, you want to serve something bigger than yourself, you want to contribute to the betterment of the nation, it's almost an obligation to consider some sort of public service. That could be in local government with the millions of people that Max mentioned earlier. That could be in federal government, but it's one of the few things that you could do that serves something other than your own personal interests. And in serving something other than your own personal interests, you actually, in fact, better yourself. You become maybe the optimal version of yourself because you strive to meet those kind of ethical and moral obligations, personal and institutional. And I know that this group of folks that operated honorably, outside of the limelight is now under even greater pressure to contribute in the same way, uphold kind of the highest standards of ethics and values, and advocate for public service because it is the ultimate check. The good people inside the organization are what kept the administration under the last presidency from sinking, kept the ship afloat. If it wasn't for that enormous cohort of excellent public servants that whether they testified in impeachment or served quietly within their departments and agencies, we could have ended up in a much, much worse place. So I encourage good people to consider public service for that reason.
Thank you. I'd love to get everyone's perspective on sort of the fragility versus the durability of our institutions and our government. In some ways, January 6th highlighted how fragile democracy can be. In other ways, we've endured. We did have a transfer of power. We did have hearings to examine what happened in Kyiv and elsewhere in the White House. So what is your perspective about sort of the state of American democracy and our institutions? How strong are they, or weak are they, or where in between, and how are you kind of positive about the outcome, or does it give you pause, or both? I guess we can again start with Ambassador Yovanovitch.
Thank you. I mean, I think this is perhaps the most important question we're facing as a nation right now. And I think, again, as all of my, friends and colleagues have said, it's going to take all of us to come together and figure this out. I was, an American who thought that our democracy was strong and enduring and forever. And frankly, I had this arrogant view that it didn't require much work on our part to keep things going, that we had, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, et cetera, are strong institutions that we always talk about. And I think what we've discovered is that over the years, not just the last administration, but over the years, there's been an erosion. And we have not been the guardians of our institutions, because at the end of the day, the Constitution, as beautiful as it is, it's a piece of paper. And our beautiful buildings in Washington and in state capitals around the country are just buildings. It takes us, going back to what I think Max said, that you need people to work in the public good, to provide services, to defend our nation, to advance our interests. And we need to really, I think, take a hard look at ourselves, take a hard look at America, and figure out how we can revitalize that and how we can come together. And I thank you for asking the question, because I think it is a really important one. But the issue of how fragile our democracy is, I think we've discovered that it can be fragile. But when I look at January 6th, when I look at some of the other challenges that we faced in the last couple of years, in the end, we've come out okay. But I think these are wake-up calls that we need to be working together to make sure we don't go to that brink, to make sure that we are strengthening our institutions, strengthening our schools, and leading the next generation with a stronger America. And that means a stronger democracy.
Ambassador Taylor.
So Ambassador Yovanovitch just talked about the importance of institutions in this. And going back, James, to the other example that you use, that is kind of what happened in Kyiv, and we were all part of that, as you say. I think that was a challenge to institutions. And the specific institution I'm talking about here is the institution in the United States that forms and executes foreign policy. And it's a broad set of organizations and people, it's the State Department, it's the embassy in Kyiv, it's the Defense Department, it's the National Security Council, it's the Congress, but it's broader too. It's the editorial boards and citizen world affairs councils and that institution that formulates and then executes foreign policy works because people trust each other certainly within government organizations, and there's some transparency that allows people to see what's going on, again, within and also from the outside, to see what's going on in that institution. And the challenge of a year ago, in 2019, was that transparency was not there, and the trust was not there. And there was, I talk about the regular channel of this institution that is, the embassy through the State Department, through the National Security Council, reporting to Fiona, and with Alex there, that's that kind of chain of command, is the regular channel. And there was an irregular channel, and the irregular channel challenged that institution, and the institution prevailed, as Ambassador Yovanovitch just said. We came through it. It was, I don't think it was a close run thing. I think but it took some extraordinary actions by some people and some bravery, real bravery by some people to stand up and point out the problem. So So I'm optimistic. I think that institution came through, and I think other institutions will be the same way. But as Ambassador Yamada said, it takes work. We need to work hard.
Fiona?
I think one of the things is the way that we think about these institutions, and Max and the Partnership for Public Service is all about the public element of this. This is not called the Partnership for Private Service, so it's the kind of like the privatization of our public policy is the problem that kind of these whole systems and institutions exist to counteract. The founding fathers were very concerned about this. Because what was America the result of? It was a result of a revolution against a tyrannical, overseas leader who, the king at the time was all about his own private power, his own private influence, his own private wealth. I mean, the United Kingdom was sort of a constitutional monarchy, but there wasn't a lot of checks and balances on the writ of the king. And that was what the whole American Revolution was about, and the building up of institutions. And George Washington didn't set out to be another tyrant, and he didn't set out to privatize everything. All of his addresses, the farewell address, all of the institutions that were created were to stop that privatization of the public good, be it on the domestic side, on the financial side, and in foreign policy. And what we were seeing over the last several years, and as Masha says, this is kind of a long tail. It's not just the last 4 years. It's been building up over time as we've had more private money getting in to influence our politics, more private interest coming in. And then after that, there's kind of an obvious slip into the privatization of every single aspect. And then people will talk about the fact that our bureaucracy, the people who work in public service, are not elected. Shouldn't everyone be elected? Isn't that the ethos of democracy? Well, actually, no. And if you start to take that to its most ridiculous extremes, do we elect our airline pilots? Do we elect our firefighters? We might elect the fire chief. We might elect, kind of somebody who might oversee this, but we want the people to be skilled. We want to know when we get in a plane that we're being flown by people who have not just been elected and deputized from the tarmac to come on and fly the plane, but people have actually trained for a long time to actually do this. We'd like our firefighters who are coming to rescue us to know what they're doing, not that they've just been deputized from the street. And this is the whole point. So why do we have public servants at all kinds of levels? Postal workers, people in the military, again, we'd like them to be trained. We want them to actually have the expertise to be able to run the institutions that we are part of. You don't go to a hospital and just have someone who's been elected off the street to do your surgery. That's the whole way that we need to think about this. So these institutions have been built up to bring something forward for the public, for all of us who live in the country. So we just have to have the right frame of mind in which we're thinking about this to figure out how these work. And of course, we wouldn't want them to be privatized in the sense that then, we're kind of choosing people to do something sensitive just kind of the day before, or that somebody's doing it for their own private purposes and not for the benefit of all of us.
Absolutely. Colonel?
Yes, I think we came through a very, very difficult period, maybe in certain ways an unprecedentedly difficult period recently, and the effects of that are going to be long-lasting, both within the public service workforce, with regards to U.S. standing in the world. Clearly, the abuses of the last administration in certain ways, at least with regards to the majority of the population, poisoned the well on public service and the effective good governance. And it's going to take some time to undo some of that damage. And one of the silver linings of at least our role, this group that you have here, that you welcomed here, is that we had the privilege to show, at least my colleagues did, to show the excellence of public service, the excellence of public servants that were brilliant, professional, poised, and in a lot of ways, exemplified the very best of what we'd want our public servants to do. So that was a silver lining, and in my mind, there's probably this. I tend to look at the world a little as an optimist. So I see still a durable institution, but it requires a lot of work to both undo the damage from the previous administration. That's probably through accountability. We have not had a full accounting of all the abuses of the key leadership in the previous administration. That needs to happen within various departments and agencies. Some of the stories are well established with regards to harm brought on to the Justice Department, the intelligence community, State Department, Defense, all of the institutions that we represent here. So that needs to happen. But I think we can do that work and can kind of rebuild, build back better. I also kind of take a view, maybe a bit of a historical view, that we've been through very, very difficult times. The Civil War, Great Depression, 2 world wars, the Civil Rights movement. These were extremely challenging and polarizing moments in U.S. history. And this will, in the kind of the breadth of history, will end up joining that list, but be one of many challenges that the United States overcomes. And we ideally will make sure that we harden our institutions against the range of abuse. It's hard to do that against the president. I don't think our system was designed in any way to protect against the abuse of the chief executive, but certainly we could make a lot of headway below that level with abuse, within departments and agencies, and maybe that's the easier starting point, and then chip away at the polarization that has kind of, brought us to the tipping point.
Thank you. Yeah, the last part of your answer sort of got at what I wanted to ask next, which is, I think you all had great answers and sort of established in broad strokes the need for the importance of these institutions. Looking back on the last couple of years, and that a lot of it predated the previous administration, but I was wondering what kinds of reforms or changes, either to the civil service, Fiona was talking about, obviously the privatization. I think we saw with someone like Gordon Sondland the problem of putting donors in some of those vital ambassador roles. Obviously, there are, to Colonel Vindman's point on, Rudy Giuliani's under active investigation for violating FARA with, trying to oust Ambassador Yovanovitch. But what are there specific reforms that you believe would strengthen our institutions that we should be talking about, or that that kind of in a specific way would help prevent what happened to you all from happening again, but also would make our institutions function better? Or is it just having the right people in these leadership positions? And I guess we can start with Ambassador Yovanovitch again.
Thank you. Thanks. A group of academics and former diplomats put together a report called U.S. Diplomacy Service for the 21st Century, sponsored by Harvard and Georgetown University. And it sets out, I think, about 12 broad areas that we need to focus on. And I won't go into them here. I mean, people can read the report, but there's a lot of good things in there, a lot of important issues that are raised and that merit, I think, a lot of consideration. And it was specifically produced for whichever candidate became president, Republican or Democrat. And I think that's important because our institutions, as has been said in one way or another by everybody on this panel, need to be nonpartisan. We need a continuity of government. We need expertise, as Fiona was saying. And that is true in, just in my wheelhouse, the State Department, National Security Service, that sort of thing. That is true there as well. I'd like to just stress one thing, that at the State Department, we're called the Foreign Service. And, that I think immediately makes people think that somehow we're foreigners or we are advocating for foreign interests or something like that. And so one of the ideas, which I actually think is a good one, is to think about changing that name. And I think also socializing more what it is that we do for America. Because, ideally, nobody in America would know my name. That's not the case anymore. But ideally, we work under the radar, and what we do is what Secretary Schultz used to call tending the garden. Every day we work on relationships and we nurture those flowers and we pull out the nasty weeds that get in there and choke off good relationships and create bad relationships. And so that we never get to a point where there, ideally, of course, where there are wars or other problems. That's what we should be doing all the time. And that's not glamorous work. It's not the sort of thing that captures the imagination or captures headlines, but it is absolutely critical to keeping America secure and strong and advancing our interests. And so, you know, one of the things that I think about, and this has been really spurred by the thousands of letters that I've received over you know, the last couple of years, and I know my colleagues have received an equal, if not more, number from many people. And what has struck me the most is what people have said that they didn't know about the State Department, you know, because, you know, the joke often is, which state do you work for? they don't know about the Foreign Service. And what does that mean exactly? And what do you do exactly? And so I think part of what we need to do, in addition to getting our own house in order, is reaching out to America and letting them know what it is that we do, so that there is the same kind of support for diplomacy as there is for the military, for example. Because in an ideal world, you would never have to use the military except as sort of the standby behind diplomacy and development. So
I'll go to Ambassador Schiller, but do you have it? What should we call the Foreign Service instead? Do you have an idea, or is that a report?
I think there are a couple of ideas out there, but definitely the word America needs to be in there.
I was going to say Team America.
Yeah. And we would all wear capes.
Right. Ambassador.
So James, I was going to ask Masha the same thing. You know, America's gardeners. I mean, what are the names here? So get some thoughts to this. But James, you have a good question about, can we tinker with the system? Can we reform the system? Are there things that we can do to make this work better? Or, and you kind of ended your question on this, or do we just need enlightened, smart, dedicated, honest people of integrity in these jobs? And I'm inclined toward the latter. I'm inclined toward the sense that, you know, yeah, there were some people in the previous administration that don't fall into that category that I just described. But there were some, and some are on this panel actually that gave themselves, that focused themselves, that dedicated themselves to this, and so a lot of all administrations are able to provide that kind of leadership and to choose the right things and pursue the right policies. But in my view, it just comes down to people. And so therefore it's elections. Goes back, I think, to what Masha just said. You know, we the people have to understand what their government is doing and choose people that can do that kind of work. So I think it's important for individuals to do that.
Fiona?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar along these lines. And, you know, the Team America idea, even if the State Department doesn't get called that, you know, I think it's something that we need to bear in mind. We also probably need an ambassador to America. And in fact, that's probably what Max and, you know, PPS are trying to be in any case, to sort of explain to Americans. And I mean, James, you do that with the media, with the Washington Post and others, you know, kind of get out there and explain to people what's happening. You know, what the State Department also does is public diplomacy in other countries to explain what America does. Well, we need to do some of that at home. I think that's part of our problem. And Max tries to do this. And in fact, I mean, if anybody wants to take some time looking at the partnership's website, I mean, I've drawn upon the facts and figures that they have about federal service for a lot of work that I've been doing and thinking about recently, because the federal government's not that large. I mean, there's only a couple of million people who work for the federal government out of 330 million, and they're all over the country. They're not just all in Washington, D.C. You know, they're not just, you know, the public servants like us here, but they're members of the military, of course, which is, you know, Alex and Bill have both served in, the postal workers, National Park Service. You know, Max has got all of this laid out. And, you know, what we really need is people to understand that they can be part of that as well. Now, it tends to be that if you look at Max's figures, that a lot of the people in the federal government have a degree, a bachelor's degree, or an advanced degree, because there's specialization required in a lot of the jobs. if you're an agronomist at the FDA, for example, you've usually got some kind of degree. Certainly the people that at CDC, you've got to hope, have been well trained in medicine and immunology. And, sometimes we had a bit of a problem with that, in the last few years as well. But that's the kind of thing that people are getting specialized. But for the most part, people are like everybody else in America. And they're from all over America. This idea that they're just in the Virginia, Maryland, DC area is just not correct. And again, Max's information shows that that's the case. So it's like Bill is saying and Masha is saying as well, we need to have people see themselves reflected in this. We need some public diplomacy that Max and others are trying to do with National Public Service Week, to go out there like an ambassador to America and say, hey, this is all of us. This is we, the people. You can be part of this as well, because we need younger people, like I said at the beginning, to come in. We need the person who's at, the local community college, and not just at the Ivy League university. Somebody who's in a technical specialization as an apprenticeship, or has just joined the military straight, out of high school, to think that, this is something that I could be doing a lifelong service. And, this is all of us. And, you can be from Utah, you can be from Iowa. You're not just going to be from Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. This is something for every American to take part in. I think once we get that, then we can fix our institutions, because we'll get people who think this is a shared endeavor and this is something for them as well. And Max, again, has loads of ideas about how we can fix the US government that, I would commend people to take a look at too.
Colonel Goodman?
Bill, what do you think about reinstating the draft? No, just kidding. No, I think one of the things it's what we're doing here to a certain extent, what Max is doing, but on a much broader scale, evangelizing for public service. And in evangelizing for public service, getting the best and the brightest to serve, model what service is for the next generation of the best and brightest to serve. But if that's kind of the conceptual level, I think there are probably a couple of practical things I'd offer to be quick. One is probably whistleblower protection. Make sure that those are strong and durable. They might not be effective in working again against the chief executive that's corrupt, but in probably in almost all other cases they would be. And I think there's a lot of progress being made in that sphere. And then I personally like the idea of some sort of national public service. It doesn't have to be, it could be mandatory. It doesn't have to be mandatory, rather. It could be something practical in that, in exchange for national public service, you have your college loans paid off. And that could be a sufficiently important form of encouragement, like it is for military service, with a GI Bill and so forth. So I think those are some practical considerations.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions from people who are watching, including a lot of people who are in government in the civil service, and I want to ask some of them. But first, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about Russia and Ukraine, since we have 4 of the top experts in the West on this topic. Secretary Blinken in Ukraine this week. I just am interested in your perspective now that we have this new administration. We saw the Russian buildup in Ukraine, and I guess the somewhat of a drawdown. But what do you make of it all, and what's your perspective on the best way to counter Vladimir Putin now in this new 2021 environment? We can go around the horn again if you'd like to start, Ambassador Yovanovitch.
Okay, I'll just be very brief, because I think my 3 colleagues are following it from a professional point of view, and I'm just reading the newspaper. I would just say that I think it's really important that Secretary Blinken is out in Ukraine fairly early on in the administration. I think he's sending a very clear statement that there are, and a message, not only to Russia, but also to Ukraine, and also to our European and other like-minded countries and institutions. And that is that Ukraine is in a 2-front war. And the first one is with Russia, not only the kinetic war that you were talking about with troops massing on Ukrainian borders, but also, the cyber front, the economic front. I mean, the list goes on of how Russia is abusing Ukraine. And it's something that I think the US is taking a very hard look at and is providing support for Ukraine. And then the second issue is, what kind of a country does Ukraine become? Does it become a democracy looking to the West, a market economy where its people will be taken care of and not living in poverty, or is it going to just become a satellite state of Russia? And in order for Ukraine to achieve what the Ukrainian people have said several times over the last 2 decades, through demonstrations, through elections, that they want to be looking to the West, they want to be living in a democracy. And in order for that to happen, the leadership needs to take tough reforms and stick with them. And we've seen some backsliding over the last couple of years. We've also seen some good steps. There need to be more good steps than backsliding. And I think Secretary Blinken is also passing that message from what I see in the press.
Ambassador Taylor?
Yeah, I agree with Ambassador Ivanovich that this visit, that Secretary of State's visit, is a strong message. By the way, he has a good team with him. He got some people on that on his delegation that know this country. I'm thinking in particular of Tori Nuland, who is a legend in Ukraine and in Moscow, and so people notice that Tori is there. And exactly as Masha says, this is a strong signal. In the first instance, to the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people, that the United States is supporting your fight and your defense, your fight against the aggression from Russia. And in my view, that's the first and frankly the most important piece of that. And that's where the United States has a big role to play. We can, and not just on political statements, not just on security assistance, but we do provide security assistance. Very serious security assistance, and that will continue. But I was struck by President Biden's 2 phone calls, 3 phone calls. First, he calls President Zelensky, and then shortly thereafter, he calls President Putin. And he tells President Putin 3 things. He says, number 1, back off of Ukraine. This is about a month ago when, as you said, James, there was this buildup of troops. He said, back off Ukraine. He was very direct. He was also direct in the second message, which was, we're going to put sanctions on you. We're going to put sanctions on you in about 2 days. And sure enough, 2 days later, there were big sanctions put on. And so that was a hard message, I'm sure, for Mr. Putin to hear in that phone call. But the third thing he did, and I think this is an indication that there are a lot of ways that we can support Ukraine. The third thing he did was to say, look, I'm willing to get together with you. This summer or something, we'll work things out. But it was clear, I'm sure, to both presidents, that if Mr. Putin were to invade Ukraine, that summit would be off. Or if Mr. Putin were to kill Mr. Navalny, that summit would be off. There'd be no way that any president, that President Biden could meet with President. So there's that kind of support, as well as all of the other phone calls and indications of support, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, the Chairman Jones, all called their counterparts. And very publicly, the Russians noticed. That phone call helped. So there, as well as I think we probably Fiona and Alex's colleagues know this drill. We encouraged Europeans to make the same kind of send the same kind of message. And it's important that I think it's important that Mr. Putin saw all that. He saw all of that response and that support for Ukraine. So there's a range of things that we can do. And again, that's where we have leverage. That's where we have now. Masha is exactly right. There's this other battle that they need to fight, and that's a Ukrainian battle that they have to fight. And we can do something, but that's their. The IMF has big leverage. They've got big loans, and they've used that leverage. And that's we have less. We can provide assistance, which we do, But I was so glad that Secretary Blinken was there sending that message.
Fiona?
Yeah, I mean, these are all very extremely important points. I'm just going to build on them a little bit, and I'm sure Alex will have something to say as well, because this is really all about Ukraine's sovereignty on the one hand and solvency on the other. In Russia, this is depicted somehow as this is part of a long-standing Cold War-esque struggle with the United States over dividing up Europe. Putin and others have said in a way that they want a new Yalta. Meaning the old wartime conferences, where you'd have Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt sitting together in Yalta, deciding about where dividing lines were going to go down in Europe. Well, now Putin owns Yalta because that's in Crimea, which they've annexed. And we're not in that game anymore. We are not playing the old Cold War or post-World War II game. We're not interested in dividing up Europe. And, that was glaringly obvious during the past administration. President Trump was not interested at all in engaging in these kinds of discussions, and found them, to be honest, a bit mystifying as to why Putin was fixated like this. But unfortunately, Russia has continued to see Ukraine as sort of part of not just its sphere of influence, but part of its own perspective as a power inside of Europe, and sees Ukraine and the tussles with us as a proxy war, which it isn't at all. So that's part of our challenge, is making the point that Ukraine is part of the European political, geographic, and economic space, and is a sovereign country, just like Poland and Hungary and the Czech Republic and the Baltic states, and that this is part of, basically finalizing and stabilizing European security for the 21st century. And, of course, then for Ukraine to be a truly sovereign country, it also has to be solvent. But as Bill and Masha have said, that's up to Ukraine to do it. But we have to be able to push back the Russian predation. We also have to be able to do it with our European allies, because Ukraine has to be embraced by the other European allies. Because Ukraine is no different from a Finland or a Baltic state, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, or Poland, or all kinds of other countries who had part of their territory in an old empire, the Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I mean, basically, Ukraine is going through the same process as every other European country has been as well. And, Russia's, basically trying to hold it back. And at one point, Russia even guaranteed Ukraine's sovereignty. In 1994, in the so-called Budapest memorandum, which has proven to be not worth the paper it was written on, because Russia said circumstances changed. Well, we can't really have that, because Russia itself actually sits on some territory that wasn't its either. Kaliningrad, an exclave of Russia, that's sandwiched between the Baltic countries and Poland, is actually Königsberg, part of East Prussia, part of Germany, which the Soviet Union seized in all of the kind of seizure of territories around the war. So, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Russia's trying to do that if you're really kind of serious about, European security and stability. And so we're kind of in an old game. We've got to send this message, not acceptable, but we've also got to do it with the Europeans. And we have to stop ourselves from being pulled into this idea that we're engaged in some kind of proxy conflict. And it was that personalization of policy that made that impossible. Because Ukraine, unfortunately, and that's why all of the four of us are here, became part of somebody else's personal agenda, lots of somebody else's personal agendas, the privatization of policy. And that was kind of what has got us all askew. And so Secretary Blinken and Deputy Secretary Newland, sorry, I've kind of muddled up the title there, are all going out there to say, this is now not private. This is back where it was before. This is a national security issue. We support the sovereignty of Ukraine. We hope they're going to be solvent too. We're working with the rest of our European colleagues to put Ukraine where it should be, which is in the European political, economic, and security space, and not as just some kind of appendage to Russia that's getting, passed back and forwards.
Well said. Colonel Vindman?
Wow, what can I add there? Maybe just a couple of thoughts. I think, frankly, in a lot of ways, the Russia-Ukraine relationship is a symptom of a geopolitical environment in which the undemocratic world sees some opportunities in the relative decline of the West. And we're talking about we're not talking about absolute decline. The US is still the largest power across the usual measures of political, economic, military, informational. But in terms of relative decline, the share of power gained by the East, that in that category I would include Russia and China. I think there are potential opportunities for an alternative to a Western liberal order. Now, there are all sorts of professional kind of debates about whether Russia is revisionist, revanchist, same thing for China. I think from a practical standpoint, it's clear that Russia has in certain ways sought to upend an international order that has not served it. Russia wants, as Fiona described, Yalta in a privileged sphere of influence, wants a veto over international affairs that are contrary to Russian interests and has acted on them. China, on the other hand, has sought to provide an alternative vision to the Western liberal order based on a authoritarian capitalist model. And I think these are sophisticated actors that don't miss the opportunities presented by a relative decline, distraction, decades of U.S. involvement in what seemingly endless Middle Eastern wars. And in those opportunities, the lack of satisfaction with outcomes using more traditional Russian means of coercion, escalating to hybrid warfare, and then ultimately to military aggression to achieve outcomes. We have Russia-Ukraine scenario now. I think there is a fundamental, in terms of an affirmative policy that the United States could take to protect and advance its interests. I think there needs to be an effort to baseline a relationship and reestablish deterrence. And fundamentally, what that means is that Russia has believed for some time now that it could act with impunity in its near abroad. It has a largely free hand with regards to interference, what we call malign influence in the U.S. and amongst the Euro-Atlantic Alliance to sow discord, fracture, move the needle towards a paradigm in which it could then apply coercion in bilateral relationships. And we need to re-baseline this relationship. And I think one of the ways we do this is something that the president's considering, short of a full measure approach, that's a signaling that there is a lot more pain that could be inflicted, costs imposed, denial of benefits for Russia achieving its objectives, contrary to U.S. interests and allied interests. I think that's one of the things we could do. There probably, I would imagine there are significant conversations going on about much higher degree of bilateral cooperation with countries that are the victims of aggressors. And that is probably, with regards to nurturing the anti-corruption, democratic reform initiatives that we've all advocated for, security cooperation, defense capabilities that could make Ukraine a much more difficult target and really change the Russia's decision-making calculus. We should also keep in mind that Russia is in a very difficult situation. In certain ways, maybe an unprecedentedly difficult situation with regards to internal turmoil and unrest, all the way from the Far East to the core of Russia. With regards to failure to provide services, discontent with the government, Navalny protests over corruption, but also a ring of instability, through Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Russia has limited bandwidth, frankly, in a lot of ways to manage all these challenges. They're, in complicating Russia's decision-making calculus, you probably start to affect its willingness to employ military aggression to achieve its aims and constrain some of its activities in that regard, at least.
Great, thank you. For the final question here, it's from someone who's currently in the government and submitted a question, is in the civil service. And I thought it would be a nice question to end on here in the last 5 minutes. And it's, what types of tools or practices that you learned during your career did you use to prepare yourselves to speak truth to power when there was obviously great personal and professional risk? This is something that is you all showed and demonstrated in ways others have not. And so here's someone inside the government who wants your advice. And if we can do this as kind of our final round, starting with Ambassador Yovanovitch.
I think you have to look at the situation, you have to look at yourself, and you have to do what you think is right. And I'm not sure that there are tools to do that. I mean, I certainly thought about my own belief system, what my values are, what the values of the United States are, thinking about the Constitution a lot, and thinking about the oath that I swore, not to an individual, not to the president, not to the Secretary of State, but to the Constitution and to the American people. And I think, when people face challenges like this, there isn't a roadmap exactly, and you have to do what you think is right. And you have to trust yourself.
Ambassador Taylor?
Yeah, I agree again with Ambassador Yovanovitch. It was not that hard. The questioner would do the same thing, I am absolutely sure. And we talked about, we the people will do, generally, people will do the right thing, as Masha just indicated. And we basically, it was not, I say it was not hard because we just told the truth. I mean, it's harder to kind of try not to tell the truth. That's a much harder job. And some people tried that and it failed. But if you know what you know, and you know what you saw, and you know what you heard, and you're asked questions about it, you speak it, and it's and again, the questioner would do the same. It is a part of, as Masha said, you kind of do what's right, you know what's right, and you kind of act on that.
Fiona?
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. And of course, there wasn't just the four of us who testified or gave depositions and information. There were many more. And it wasn't always just the people who appeared on everyone's television screens, because there were, remember, closed-door hearings, there was a lot of questions. And I think for the most part, the vast majority of our colleagues, both career public servants and political appointees, did actually step up and do their job. Because you have to remember as well that every political appointee takes an oath. But when you're sworn in to these positions, cabinet officials, members of Congress as well, kind of when they're elected, they take an oath. And if you take that oath seriously and you're not just there for a power game or for a paycheck, but you're actually taking seriously what your job is, which is to be part of a team working together for a broader public good, then it just follows naturally from that. I think every single one of the people who took part, as painful as it was, were thinking they were doing part of their job. And congressional oversight is an important part of our representational democracy. So, and as Bill is saying, it was harder to figure out ways of not doing this than it was to actually step forward and to do what was necessary. And I think everybody who's listening here would have done exactly the same thing.
Colonel?
I think I would definitely agree with Bill that it really wasn't that hard. I think the key was in terms of stringing together enough of right decisions about what was right and wrong to kind of manage a very complex situation, especially for the folks that were in government and potentially had something to lose. At the same time, even foreseeing the consequences, and I think everybody in this group definitely foresaw the consequences. It still was not hard. None of us were intimidated. We did what we thought was right. We were not going to be pushed around, and I think that's that probably accounts for large swaths of the professional public servants. Maybe in my experience, I don't know if as many of the political appointees in the Trump administration would do the right thing. It's just that was my view. Is unfortunately I witnessed that was not the case. But there was a failure of accountability somewhere along the way also, because these, maybe not in the National Security Council or the White House, but in other departments and agencies, these were Senate confirmed individuals, and there was a role that the Senate had in making sure that they confirm the right people for those positions. And I hope that we in the future we're a little bit more effective in determining who's qualified for those positions. But doing the right thing is not that hard, especially in that kind of particularly meaningful situation where all of our values were threatened and we had to defend our values.
Thank you. I'm going to toss it back to Max to close us out, but I want to thank all four of you for your public service, your patriotism, and for joining me in this great conversation this last hour. Max?
Thanks, James.
Oops.
You're on.
Oh, good. I'm on. Good. You're muted. All right. Thank you, James, and thanks to all the panelists for really a tremendous conversation. You know, my main takeaway is that you've demonstrated in this conversation really the model of what we want in a professional public service. Fiona, you talked about expertise, and especially in a world as dangerous and fast moving as the one we operate in, that expertise is vital to keep all of us safe and thriving. And combining that expertise with a core recognition that your responsibility is to the public good, and that all of you are stewards of the public good. And so again, expertise and commitment to the public good seem to me to be fundamental. Perfect conversation for Public Service Recognition Week. I would ask three things of our audience further though, and one that would be check out the 2021 Service to America Medal finalists. We have a People's Choice Award, so you all get to vote as to a winner there, so please look and vote. Secondly, subscribe to the partnership's second season of its podcast, and this one is now Profiles in Public Service, which tells the stories of unsung public service heroes. And we're beginning with a great group from NASA that will be up and running tomorrow. And then finally, thank your federal, state, local public servants. You know, they're doing amazing work. This is Public Service Recognition Week. Clearly this week they deserve thanks. Thank them even beyond this week. And thanks to all of you for paying attention. It's been a pleasure.